before Kadyrov. Of course, it was really hard for stuff like this to happen after Kadyrov. But before Kadyrov was really reading the literature, because that told you what people were trying to say and what they can't say in the real world, what they can't say in a journalistic article, a news article that's going to be heavily critiqued, they can say in fiction. Fiction brings out a lot of what authoritarian regimes never seem to notice, the symbolism that sort of goes above their heads. And that's what we're seeing right now. There's a reason magical realism, which I'm bringing up again, is on the rise again in authoritarian countries. It's all over the place when it comes to Egypt. It's a style I take very seriously, because it's a great way to really touch on anything from the patriarchy to corruption to extremism to authoritarianism without really having to say the words. So everything like that really matters, in my opinion. And that's an approach I took. So that's how I got to learn a lot more about Chechnya. Apart from actually speaking to people and gathering sources, reading both the nonfiction and the fiction was essential.
Oh, thank you for that. And Ali, or if you want me to call you Alejandro, whatever, feel free to jump in if you have any questions as well, okay?
Oh,
don't stay silent if you have a question.
Thank you, yeah.
Hello. All right. Welcome. We are live now, streaming, and thank you, Julie. I've tweeted out the link as such, and I may have to send, because you had said some wonderful things I was overhearing, Karim, because he was discussing his love of long form and how he got involved with literature. So I may have to put that in another video to be released. But I do want to definitely bring you in. I wrote on Twitter because I believe at the same time we have the Jake Paul, Tyron Woodley 2 weigh-ins. And I said, instead, why not come to our conversation at the end of our semester to talk about Hugoism and politics? Because we don't know that this is going on, or yes, we do, but it's not being covered in the mainstream press. That Manny Pacquiao is very, very likely to be made the Filipino president in May of 2022. My student here, I cannot wait. She really uncovered some very interesting things about his relationship. And I am the worst with pronunciation. I think, Karim, you know this. Duterte, the current president. Alejandro, am I right?
Duterte.
Duterte. You guys, I may be a professor, but that doesn't mean I know how to pronounce things very well. I'm a visual person. And we're going to tackle that, see how he's buying votes, literally, and how people see him as something almost godlike and what that means. And then we're also going to bring up, okay, Karim, you may have to put this one, Vitaly Klitschko.
Yeah, Vitaly Klitschko.
Oh, goodness, I just should have gone with it. Who we all know from the Klitschko era with his brother, former heavyweight champion, who is now the mayor of Kiev, and where we have Russian troops that have been building up. We've already seen Crimea be taken, and I guess Klitschko, who is broken and gone very pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia, is saying that, hey, we will fight, we will defend our country. So, woo, for me, this is what I'm here for. This sport has, and you know, as Julie, I'll introduce Julie Kedzie, my co-professor. We just finished the semester. I've been grading and got caught at a brunch thing that I didn't know would go long. So Julie, you've been my savior this semester.
I have not helped you enough, but thank you, Nancy. I appreciate that.
No, thank you. Yeah. But she and I have long known, we do a whole segment on geopolitics and combat sports and how it's really been embedded with combat sports from the beginning, and how the strong man uses a strong man very often for his own purposes, because it's someone who is noted, has a celebrity, but at times globally, it's the boxer represents so much, especially when he's a champion. And we've seen, and we cover Muhammad Ali, and we cover Frazier, with Rumble in the Jungle and Thrill in Manila. And we also talked about Saudi Arabia and its new desire to get into hosting events. But this has kind of come at the end of the semester. So I am so thankful that we have someone who is on our syllabus for much of his work. And along with Ali, many students have used you. A student, well, we won't get into it, but you're often seen as the expert in a field. So even if you don't talk about the subject they're writing about, they can forward what you've written on another area. So it is a pleasure. Thank you. I really want to talk through these. I want to learn about what's going on. So Karim Zadin, thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna have a little bio. I promise I won't make it too much. An investigative journalist covering sports and authoritarian regimes in Russia, Chechnya, Brazil, and the Middle East. His work has been the symbiosis between fight promoters and autocrats, a relationship that deflects public scrutiny while enabling inequality and oppression. You were born in Cairo, Egypt, and you studied political science and international economic development at the University of Toronto before beginning his career as a sports journalist for Bloody Elbow. And you also, though, you were mentioning earlier, you write, you are an Arabic English translator and you've translated short stories, but you've also written some for like Arab Lit Quarterly.
Yes.
I believe. And I also know you were involved in the HBO documentary that was done for HBO Sports on Kadyrov and Chechnya. So you've also been in the documentary world. So you do pretty much everything. And I know that you're willing to sacrifice a lot as well, being that you're in an undisclosed location as well.
Yes, but at least I can make this undisclosed location look pretty.
No, and we kind of all have undisclosed in the new Zoom era, right?
It's true.
Yeah. I don't know, you guys, I'm maybe not in DC. But Karim, thank you. You've come to our class before and it was enlightening. And again, thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Oh,
My pleasure, Nancy. Thank you for having me.
thank you. And then Ali, can you tell us a little bit, just real quick, about where you're from and what you've just written about?
Yeah, so I was born in Caracas, Venezuela, and I lived most of my life there. I did my senior year in Miami, Florida, where I lived for a year, and then through quarantine, and I just moved to DC. And I took the Professor Kidder's class, and the first paper I wrote about was about Rumble in the Jungle, about Muhammad Ali, and I talked about Mobutu Sese Seko and all of that. And then when she told us about the second paper, I was thinking again, like about the connection between sports and politics, which, you know, I've never talked about before, never seen before. And yours was the first paper I found. And I was like, okay, like I read it all and I was like, I'm using this, but I wasn't, you know, I was thinking about like which athlete to choose until I ran into Manny Pacquiao, which, you know, I just thought he was just running for president. And then, you know, I looked into his history. He promotes like a lot of homophobic hate. He like runs through the Bible and stuff like that. Yeah, so in my essay, like I first established that connection of sports and politics because, you know, I never really realized like how important it was. Like it brings pride, like power, money. And yeah, I kind of wanted to ask you, like, before, I feel like governments used athletes, like when Hitler wanted in the Olympics to prove that he was like the superior race and stuff like that. But I feel like now, like, it's taking a shift because I feel like through social media, athletes are able to like gain like bigger platforms, and especially Manny, since I feel like he's a national hero because he's the representation of Filipino and, you know, internationally. So yeah, I wanted to talk to you about like the shift you think it made from like where governments youth athletes kind of backwards, like now athletes are using governments or their platforms to talk about politics.
I think that's a fantastic question. Truly, truly, probably one of the best questions I've been asked, because it adds a new layer to this that we rarely think about, which is the social media sort of element to this. Yes, you're absolutely right that athletes such as Manny Pacquiao, and we can come up with other examples if we want. Muhammad Salah has a great example. People who truly represent their nation to the most part, because these nations don't necessarily have the same global representation in terms of athletes that the United States does. The United States can send hundreds and hundreds of athletes to each Olympic Games, win plenty of gold medals. A lot of these countries don't have that same, sort of privilege. So when a star does emerge, that star wields power beyond what you'd expect, because you're thinking they're an athlete. What can an athlete really do in this world? Well, there's very little they can't, because of that power that they achieve. First of all, sports are, I think, no matter what stage of the world where we go through, no matter we're going through a pandemic, we're going through war, we're going through whatever we are, sports find a way to continue to sort of prevail in all these eras, whether people use them for nationalism, whether they use them as a way to unite people, etc. Sports has always played a very large role in society. It carries massive fan bases around the world, depending on sports. Like, there are complexities there that aren't worth getting into here. But Manny Pacquiao's rise makes sense, doesn't it? He's a spectacular athlete, or at least he was in his heyday, a champion like none other, one of the greatest boxers of all time. It brings that level of pride back to his country, a country that does have a chip on its shoulder, like many others. Like, I mean, I say this as an Egyptian. Egypt does have a chip on its shoulder when it comes to stuff like that. You see Mohamed Salah playing football for Liverpool right now, and every time he scores a goal and comes down as the best player of the league, the top goal scorer, that's pride right there. Even I, as somebody who writes about this, can't help but smile when I see him score. And I say that mainly because, on a relative scale, he's pretty harmless compared to a lot of the other athletes. So I do smile when I see that. It does bring this sort of, yeah, look at that. Look at this Egyptian go. Now imagine that on a much larger scale with Manny Pacquiao. And imagine that when he can wield it to his own benefit. And he learned to do that very early on, becoming a congressman. Well, that wasn't very hard for him, was it? That's like, you think about the first half of his life versus the second half, or the first stage of his life versus the stage he's in right now. Well, he went through extreme hardships and extreme poverty. Mind you, that makes him even more relatable to people. Again, another similarity he has with Mohamed Salah and other athletes like him. They tend to come from poverty. They tend to come from at least a modest background. Let's not always say extreme poverty or a traumatized life, but a lot of the case it is, especially when it comes to boxers. So this adds more and more elements of sort of relatability. Now you take that and you add, unfortunately, conservative values, and some of them really being awful, hateful, bigoted beliefs, like his homophobia, and that's when we start to see something very, very troubling. I remember a couple of years ago, I'm going to keep coming back to Egypt on this because I see so many similarities between Manny and Mohamed Salah on these levels. But a couple of years ago, Mohamed Salah made a very, very, very unfortunate statement about a teammate of his on the Egyptian national team who was sexually abusing women. And he came out saying, listen, he's young, let's try and forgive him and stuff like that. It was exactly the wrong statement that was supposed to come out. Unfortunately, you started seeing other men in Egypt regurgitate that exact statement. Conversely, now you're seeing him promote vaccinations, and suddenly more Egyptians are out getting vaccinations. So you see the sort of effect these athletes can have on people. It's unfortunately true. It's not even subtle anymore. So Manny Pacquiao does bring that effect. Will you say anybody's entitled to their beliefs? Sure, as long as they're not hateful, and as long as you're not pushing them in public and propagating them and leading to hateful results. The more he spreads homophobic views, and that's just one of the many things he's done, the more people who are in the LGBTQ plus community, who are queer in any way, shape, or form, and out in public about it, well, they can possibly get hurt, and they will get hurt and injured. Now you take that and you couple it with the tense political situation that the Philippines is in with Duterte, and with his push for this level of ultra-nationalism that was calling for violence against other segments of society, drug users, etc., just to unite people. It's again playing on the oldest elements that there were. I mean, you were talking about Hitler a second ago and his government and how he was using, well, we look at that and we say, okay, well, that may be the blueprint for modern day sports washing. at least sports washing in the 20th century, or how governments end up, propagating sports activity for their own benefits. But you still see that exact same thing happening now. Well, Duterte, one of the things he immediately attached himself to was Manny Pacquiao. Now, you had Duterte's ultra-nationalism and authoritarian approach. You couple that with Manny Pacquiao's conservative views and extreme popularity, and it was a recipe for disaster from the beginning. Now, the collapse and the fallout and what has happened since, and their, the end of their friendship and Pacquiao running for president, well, this is all politics at play. But overall, to an extent, we are seeing something different happen because of the power of social media, but the game is still the same. We're still playing chess. The game hasn't changed. It's the players have a lot more power than they ever did before.
Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
and please chime in, because Karim, what I'm wondering, who is actually the puppet master here? Is it Manny Pacquiao? Is he able, or what I'm worried about is he's someone who, I think you brought this up, Ali, is that we know his story. He grew up in poverty. So how is does he, and not saying that he may not have, I'm sure he has the intellectual ability, but in terms of the knowledge of running the government and stuff like that, I assume he's got people there who are helping him. And what do you think? Because I worry that is also another thing, that again, there's always someone under the strong man.
Well, there always is someone there. I mean, we can just use Donald Trump as an example. Did Donald Trump run his own government? Or was Donald Trump just the face of this government? I mean, sure, he had policies, he could try and implement things, but he had a team. He had a whole White House of people. They were almost equally incompetent, but he still had them. So it doesn't really change much. At the end of the day, does it really matter who this supposed puppet master is, or if there is such a puppet master to begin with? At the end of the day, they're all if he has a team behind him, well, they're all behind that same goal, which is him taking power and him pushing the measures that he wants to push, however harmful they may be, however not harmful they may be. The idea is to get him into power and to take it from there. This applies to any leader. No leader is operating solo. Not Ramzan Kadyrov, who literally is a king in his own fiefdom in Chechnya. Truly, he has very little oversight, but he is not entirely in control of himself. There are others around him. He does take advice from specific people, and he does have to be diplomatic with other elements of society, including the sheikhs and the religious sector of Chechnya. That he has to play that religious game as well. He has to speak to the other government, the neighboring governments of Ingushetia and Dagestan. Like, there are elements at play, and there are other factors there, and there are other people you have to coordinate with. You're never solo in any of these missions. There's no authoritarian leader who runs his own government entirely alone. Even I can speak to Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt. Well, he's part of a large military dictatorship, an infrastructure that has existed since 1952, when the coup d'etat happened that killed the monarchy in Egypt. That's an infrastructure that's been there for a long time. You might have a figurehead, and that figurehead might have, authority or charisma or whatever it may be that has landed him that role. But that doesn't mean every single policy comes from him. But at the same time, does it matter? There's still the policies being implemented.
So, and I don't mean to be, I'm so curious about all this. What is the US? Because we've been invested. I mean, we, as a superpower, which we're not any, because I believe the super nations have all kind of taken different roles. What does the US, or what does the United Nations think about the Philippines? I mean, they've already got someone who's not obeying human rights, or I should say, has had many violations, with killing drug dealers who you don't need evidence, I guess, in the Philippines. What do other countries think about this?
Here is, unfortunately, where I am quite skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
Politicians are politicians. If we're expecting them to play the moral game, or to reflect what we believe in society, or at least what a segment of us believes in society, well, that's unfortunately naive thinking that I have been party to far too many times. And I speak of not, I'm not talking about, Trump's regime. Let's talk about Biden's administration. Do you think he's not going to cooperate with the Philippines if Manny Pacquiao's in charge? Has it changed what he's been doing with Duterte? And unfortunately, any politician is going to do the same thing. As a matter of fact, for a lot of these countries, a lot of democratic countries, as we've seen throughout history, they tend to enjoy working with authoritarian regimes. It's a lot easier than dealing with other democratic countries. It simply is. Why do you think the US has toppled so many regimes in the past? It's because it's easier to work with the authoritarian leader of your choice.
Oh.
So I highly doubt, I truly, truly highly doubt that this affects the US policy in any way, shape, or form. Truly. That is my view, though. I understand if anyone has a different view, I'm all ears. But truly, that's how I see this.
Do you, just because I also want to get into Klitschko and what's going on, and maybe hopefully you can explain what's going on with Russia, because talk about diplomacy and sports. We have, I guess we will segue to this, and we'll definitely come back to Manny Pacquiao. The US, we have decided to diplomatically ban the Chinese Winter Olympics that's coming up in February of 2022. Meaning basically no one, Biden nor his wife are going to go, or other, people.
Government representatives, yeah.
Government representatives. That's it, though.
That is it. It's political theater.
I kind of am thinking, well, we don't want to affect the athletes, but it was a bargaining point at when we, in 1980 and 84. And
when the US really wanted it to be, when the US was that determined to oppose communism, they were very happy to actually not even consider the athletes' opinions about it and completely ban it. Sorry to interrupt, but I really feel very strongly about this one. It is a complete sham. There's a reason I haven't written about the diplomatic boycott, just because it bothers me so much. It's not. Do you really think that the US was going to at any point actually send government representatives to China? A clear sign of cooperation, or at least legitimizing what China is doing? They were never going to do that. Saying that there's a diplomatic boycott means nothing. It's just saying, oh, we're doing the same thing we were doing anyway. Yeah. And England joining in a few other countries. What is this sham? What is this sham? What have you actually done? Okay, on the most surface level, you have at least acknowledged that sports washing exists.
Yeah.
Well, goody for me. I already knew that. Most of us already knew that. There are countless articles about that. What have you really done? Is this what we're paying taxes for? Is this what governments are supposed to exist for, to regurgitate what's in my articles already? Come now. Diplomatic boycotts are completely useless. They're utterly useless. We already knew what China's doing. We already know why we should not be cooperating with China, why this Olympic Games is a sham, why it's propaganda through and through. We know this. Nothing is about to change. The fact that the athletes are going there still means that China will get exactly what it wants. And when I say China, I really want to specify that I'm, of course, talking about the Chinese government. I have absolutely nothing against the people of China. I'm referring to the Chinese government, of course. And generally, when I'm talking about countries, I'm really referring to the governments. And that government's going to get exactly what it wants. What does it want to do? It really wants to present China as this flourishing country, and it wants to bring these games and have the whole world watching. And they're going to do exactly that. If the US sends its athletes, well, that means media outlets are going to cover it. That means journalists are going to fly there. That means all the different NBC and I don't know who else are going to be broadcasting it 24/7. Has anything really changed then? I know the Winter Games aren't as special as the Summer Games, but China had the Summer Games just 2 decades ago too. Was it the year 2000? Something like that? I'm trying to remember.
2008. I can't.
Yeah, it was 8. I think it was 2008. You're right. That's it. And I mean, they had the Summer Games then too. Nobody stopped them. And was anything really very different? I understand that the Uyghurs were not in internment camps then, but really, were we lacking of human rights abuses from China in 2008?
Yeah. What about the Chinese tennis star? Because that's interesting.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one. Absolutely.
Her name,
Peng Shuai.
I knew it started with a P. Just to give people up to date on what happened is that she is a top tennis player in the world rankings, and she's toured and she's won several tournaments. And help me with this, Karim, because the information gets sketchy because of what is being told from the Chinese government and what we're hearing. But supposedly, I think on a social media outlet, she said that she had been in a relationship or sexually assaulted with like the former, like a very high level Chinese official.
Official, yes.
Yeah.
That's what I understood. That was sexual assault by a very high-ranking Chinese official.
After that was put out there, I think the post was deleted, and no one could hear from her anymore. She was missing, wasn't calling people back, and this is not a new story in China where people go missing. And I think though, so it's the World Federation of Tennis, or I think WFT.
Oh, the Women's Tennis Association, the WTA.
Because they have said, because I don't know if they got in touch with the UN got in touch with her through a Zoom call. For me, I mean, have we not?
That was actually the IOC that did that. The International Olympic Committee.
I don't think that there was reassurance when you get a Zoom call. I think you look at a lot of prisoner of war videos in history, and there are a lot of things that can be done. But the IOC is saying, we believe China, that they showed us her, but I do believe the tennis is saying we're not going to China. No more tournaments until I think.
So what bothers me about what the IOC said is we come back to this point of Thomas Bach, the president of the IOC. Yeah. They asked him, what does this mean? What does this mean are you seriously going to continue holding the Olympic Games in China? This is what's happening to athletes. He said, listen, what we are going to do is participate in quiet diplomacy, which really means we're going to do nothing at all. We're gonna wait and see how this plays out. This is what the Olympic Games stands for nowadays. When people talk about unity and uniting the world and all those rings and blah, just understand that this is actually what the Olympic Games stands for. Now try and look back on where the Olympic Games have been hosted for the last 2 decades, and you come and tell me that they represent anything other than authoritarianism and propaganda. Now the WTA, talk about another example of just performative theater, is that they already weren't holding events in China. Those events were suspended due to COVID. They did nothing new. Nothing new. I mean, there's not really much else they could have done. So I guess, the public stance against China is worth something, but it's not costing them anything. There are no sacrifices being made here. And nothing is going to change without sacrifices. We talk about the same thing. Well, people get mad at me and say, what about all those athletes that should be going and won't have these opportunities at these gold medals? Well, that's the problem. The world seems to be going around because of these gold medals, as if skyscrapers will fall if no one wins the gold medal this year, as if the world is actually as if COVID will just disappear if a gold medal is not handed out this year to one American athlete. Are you kidding me here? There are things that factor in far more than sports, and nothing changes without a sacrifice. Not anything in this world. Yeah. It's really that simple.
I agree with you. And I think we were talking about this at the beginning of COVID, when people are like, we need sports to bring back normalcy. And I thought, actually, we have, that's when you are thinking about the athletes, and to know that we can sacrifice until we know it's safe. And it looks like things are going that well or better. And, I think that what I liked is when the NFL, just to go into that world, they were going to penalize teams if they had COVID outbreaks and tell them, like, you can't make this game up or you're going to lose. And guess what? Most teams got vaccinated. Not everyone, as we've seen, but that was going to be their sacrifice. I think it's very interesting. I want to talk a little bit more about the Olympics too, because I thought it was interesting at the Winter Olympics, a Belarusian sprinter, I believe.
The Summer Games, sorry, I think.
Summer Games, excuse me.
Yes.
In Japan. Yes. I don't know her name exactly, but
I don't remember either, actually.
I will look it up and put it in the notes. But how she was told by Belarus, another dictatorship, where I believe it's the brother of the dictator, who is the Olympic chairman. And he, I guess, informed her she was running a race that she had not prepared for. I think she's usually a more of a small distance, and they wanted her to run a relay 400. And she said negative things about it, or just said, I can't believe I'm having to do this on social media. And then we quite we saw this. It's not the hidden things that are going on like China can hide. We saw her go to the airport and being taken, and people saw her. People came into her room. Belarusian officials took her stuff, and she was being sent back. However,
Oh, they were quite literally going to kidnap her.
Yes,
Absolutely was
and
kidnapping.
we saw this in live time. I remember seeing someone tweeting about it. Like, is anyone at the Tokyo airport right now to like make sure she doesn't get on that plane? Now, thankfully, that because it had that much press and people were watching, she was able to get, I believe she went into Japan, or someone gave her sovereignty, or
I believe she, when she got to the airport, she ran up to the police officers at the airport, the Japanese police officers, who ended up holding back the Belarusian committee, the Olympic committee, basically. If I recall correctly, I could be wrong here, but I think she just made a run for it in the airport and actually arrived at and met with the police officers then and there, explained the situation, and that was the only reason she got out of it.
And yes, and so then,
and of course, social media factored into her being able to stay in Japan properly. So of course, you're absolutely right there.
But it wasn't. Where was, to your point, Karim, where was the IOC in terms of protecting her in the village, of giving her shelter and not allowing them to kidnap her and put her on this plane? She had to use a public appeal, and she had to go to the Japanese authorities. And I believe she was able to go to another country, that she didn't have to go back to Belarus. I think it's Ukraine to be, but yes, the IOC is really just out for the IOC to make the Olympics their, money factor, and to get these awards given out.
Absolutely. Some more quiet diplomacy, maybe this time with Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko. That's probably what Thomas Bach was after at that point.
Yeah. Yes. So if that's a great. Can we switch to Ukraine? Because this seems to be unlike Manny Pacquiao. He seems to be using his notoriety as a boxer, and maybe it's just because I'm on Ukraine's side, because I believe they are a country and they should be independent. Can you tell us more history and how he became this mayor of Kiev?
So Vitaly Klitschko is actually one of those people that I have not had the chance to write about so far. And it surprises me to this day. I keep thinking about it from time to time, is that he's quietly been the mayor of Kiev for a while through a lot of this, conflict, the annexation of Crimea onwards, to the Donbass war, to all sorts of things that have been happening. And he's quietly been the mayor of Kiev through a very, very interesting period in Ukrainian history. So I think that's a vulnerability on my part in terms of a blind spot for me, in terms of coverage that's lacking, that I need to make up for soon. So you'll be seeing something more significant on Klitschko in the future, especially on his rise to power, which I find to be quite significant and quite interesting, really. But again, it's more of that popularity of being a boxer. Now he rode the wave of this, one of the greatest of all time again, quite similar to Manny Pacquiao, and rose to become a mayor of Kiev. But the difference is that I could be wrong here, but I don't believe that the Klitschko brothers emerged from poverty. I mean, these are highly intellectual human beings, both very, very well educated, extremely talented boxers, and I don't think they were struggling for money at any point. But stuff like that doesn't necessarily factor in Russia. When I come to think of a lot of the athletes and a lot of the significant figures that there are right now, not everyone is emerging from poverty in Russia. It doesn't really factor in. It comes down to your machismo, how you present, and combat sports really plays a massive role when it comes to either Russia or Ukraine, or this whole post-Soviet bloc almost. You find that those were the kinds of athletes and sportsmen that they were really into. These more masculine ones, let's say Greco and amateur wrestling of any kind, and Roman wrestling, that kind of stuff, and boxers, of course, and MMA came much later. Football, of course, factored in, but to an extent, Klitschko represented a lot of these things, these ideals that Ukrainians enjoyed: a love for one's country, extremely intelligent, and at the same time, this humongous specimen of a human being who was actually an incredible fighter in his day. So his rise to power doesn't surprise me in the slightest. What's going on right now, I think, is really interesting, because there's layers and layers to the story in Ukraine. So first of all, Ukraine is struggling with a dictator, not in their own country, but in the neighboring country of Russia. Now, Putin has been, and Putin is, I'm going to struggle to say this in a way that doesn't sound complimentary to him, because I really cannot stand Putin, but amongst all the dictators and authoritarian leaders in this world, he is by far the craftiest, the most intelligent, and the most dangerous of them all. There's no doubt about that. I've had the pleasure and the privilege to speak to on air multiple times with former world champion Garry Kasparov, and this is a statement that he relayed time and time again, and it eventually really truly made sense. As I've come to cover so many dictators, there are very few with the intelligence and the longevity of Vladimir Putin. And that speaks to something, and that shows you the pressure that a country like Ukraine is under right now. Look at how the annexation of Crimea happened, and look at what little was done about it around the world. Nobody touches Putin at the end of the day. They say they can't stand him. They'll sanction Russia. They'll do this and that. And yet somehow Russia makes it through. I'll never forget when I arrived in Russia the first time in 2014, I arrived on a day called Black Tuesday, and it was Black Tuesday because of a massive recession that had just hit Russia. This is December of 2014. And so, 2014 is also when the Crimea happened and all sorts of big things happened at the time. And I arrived on this Black Tuesday, and the country was just in collapse. Like, we're talking about lineups everywhere. People were just trying to buy furniture before the currency completely collapsed. They're just trying to spend their savings on anything other than the currency that they had. And it was a horrible time for Russia. And I remember reading Western outlets, and it was glee from all these outlets about, oh, look, well, this is what Putin gets for, this. We're going to place sanctions on him because of this is what he deserves. But you're affecting a country as well. And Putin ends up coming out of this even stronger. He did. He emerged from this quite strong in the end, and he's still there. That's the unfortunate thing. And the only people who suffered were the citizens. Now, the same thing happens in Ukraine. And Ukraine, on the other hand, unfortunately, has had to radicalize is the wrong word here, but it has pushed itself in a direction of nationalism and ultranationalism that is extremely concerning. Truly, truly very concerning. Like, we're talking about some of their elite paramilitary units are complete neo-Nazis. Like the Azov battalion are neo-Nazis. Neo-Nazis, by the way, that were trained by the FBI and the CIA. That's who funded them for quite some time. So when we talk about who likes to fund who and what kind of company the United States keeps, it's not democratic company, that's for sure. So Ukraine has really gone through a lot. I'm going to keep getting sidetracked here if I don't just focus on this. So one of the people we saw, and the person who emerged as their president eventually was Zelensky. I believe his name is Volodymyr Zelensky, and at first he seemed like a reasonable leader, but he's slowly gotten a lot more concerning with his policies and his approach to Russia and his challenging of Russia. It's almost as if his own presidency now relies on this showmanship going back and forth between Russia and Ukraine. And at the same time, radicalizing and nationalizing his country behind him and extremely anti-Russia. Don't get me wrong, they deserve to dislike Russia, but it's now being weaponized against the Ukrainian people by this president. One of the things he's actually done is create this rivalry with Klitschko. They are not on the same side. They're not even in the same political party, as far as I understand. They are, and Klitschko was not even the person who started this rivalry, but Zelensky actually, from the very first time, from as soon as he set foot in office for his first term, knew that his future opponent was probably going to be Klitschko, and that he was a truly formidable opponent. So he has spent the last few years causing all sorts of trouble for Kiev. Like, truly, there's been a strange back and forth between them over the past few years. It went quiet for a little while, but he keeps bringing up all these different corruption scandals in Kiev going on. Klitschko then goes and blames them on Zelensky, saying that this is a political ploy, and that this is just political pandering and tactics going on. So there is massive internal conflict and internal politics going on in Ukraine. Then there's the element of geopolitics, and there's just the festering of ultranationalism happening in the country as well. So when we talk about Ukraine, Klitschko does not represent everything that is happening. He's one clog in this really rusting machine that exists in Ukraine right now.
And what's going with the buildup of Russian troops? I see that they're seeing this collapse and this, I'm going to call it a mess of what's going on with the infighting of Ukraine, because is that what they're trying to take of? Because I've heard in the last few weeks, it's just more troops and more troops. I believe, the US is doing our diplomatic threatening of sanctions, which I think Russia's just like, look, that does nothing. We know that.
I didn't know there was anyone left to sanction in Russia anyway.
I know.
I thought they got everybody. What's left?
What I know. And so so it's interesting that Klitschko, because there was a Times, I really wanted to read it. I couldn't get through the paywall on the Sunday Times, where they did this long profile, and the headline is something about like Klitschko is ready to defend his city. Mm-hmm. So it almost, what you're describing, like Klitschko using, that he is power, I'm a tough guy. I can battle people. Is he almost trying to do a power maneuver with Zelensky?
Zelensky.
Zelensky.
At this point? Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, because I heard that maybe he had been offered to be the president of Ukraine or the leader, but he turned it down. I guess I'm wondering, what is Klitschko? What is his end game?
I think I had seen Klitschko just a few weeks ago mention that he came out publicly saying that he had never announced that he was running for president, and he doesn't know where all this talk is coming from. Again, this all sounds like, politics at play. So I can't quote this as fact at all, but I think that's his most recent statement. But the idea that he's coming out with this, very courageous, I will defend Ukraine, etc. I will defend my city of Kiev. I think that's, is part of, and just the result and the consequences of what's happening in Ukraine right now. Well, you have people who are frightened, and when people are scared and desperate, it never leads to progressiveness. Let's just say that, unfortunately. It does lead you down a very difficult path, a nationalistic path, and that's kind of what's happening in Ukraine right now. And that's what's happening on a smaller scale in Kiev, which is a much more open city generally. And Klitschko, I never got the sense, and again, I have not studied him the way I have a lot of other dictators, so I could be wrong here, but I really never got the sense that he was an authoritarian or he was pushing for that kind of approach, or even as a strongman leader, truly. And I could be very wrong here, but that was never the impression I got. But I can see and I can sense a shift in his approach now, if only to survive. At this point, if everybody around you is radicalizing, is slowly leaning a little more to the right, well, then your job is to sink or swim at that point. You have no other choice. You can't go the other way. You can't say, well, I don't really think anything's going to happen. If you're asked a question like that, a tough question like that, you got to give the tough answer. And I'm not defending him in any way. I'm just trying to state what I think is going on at this point. So he's in a very tough position. He might actually want to simply do his job and approach and help Kiev seize all these different problems. We're talking about an intelligent human being as well, not somebody who's coming out of nowhere saying he's better than everyone else. Truly someone who came and wanted to work through the system. Maybe this is what's happening right now is not at all what he signed up for. And unfortunately, this is now the game that he has to play.
And then just to ask your opinion, Karim, because we saw Crimea just be taken over, and I don't even know what kind of backlash they had politically with other countries. I'm sure that there were some sanctions again. Do you think that Putin might want to try and take Ukraine? Or is it just a ploy?
That's a difficult question, but I would at this stage right now, I would say no. I would say that would not be a smart. I'd say Russia, as much as Putin has survived, and as much as we talked about his longevity and his intelligence, as much as he is at a very strange time in his tenure as president of Russia, he does not have much longer to go, and he knows this. I mean, he can continue extending his time, sure, but he's aged. He's nearly 70. He's past his time, and the only reason he's still sticking around is because he's not 100% sure what's going to happen to him if he leaves right now. There's a massive vacuum there, and there are plenty of oligarchs that he has upset over the years. At the same time, Russia is dealing with a very difficult time, and there have been plenty of protests asking for his removal, more than anything in the first like 15 years of his presidency. So we are seeing a shift in Russian mentality. We are seeing them falling into more and more poverty and a more difficult political and economic environment, and a new generation that simply can't stand him. I think that's a trifecta situation that says, no, let's not go to war. I don't see how war in this case unites his people when, for me, I was in Russia a lot in the immediate aftermath of this newfound rivalry between Russia and Ukraine at the time, and the annexation of Crimea, etc. And I spoke to a lot of Russians, and a lot of Russians who have family in Ukraine who go back and forth all the time, and they're like, we don't understand what the hell's going on. While others were talking about how suddenly rampant the nationalism was and how just vilified, like people were being just, oh, you're from Ukraine, we'll screw you, we'll screw you. Well, just it was very strange, and I spoke to a lot of people who were very confused at the time. And Putin could want to play up on that, but I don't think he's in a position to go to war with a country like Ukraine. I don't think so. I don't think, and let's be fair here, I don't think there's a winner in a situation like this.
No.
There's never a winner in war, and there's definitely not going to be a winner in a situation like this.
Would you say, oh, excuse me, Nancy.
Oh,
Sorry.
please.
Would you say that the threat of war is what, keeping them on their toes and kind of trying to maintain a nationalism, like to consolidate his power is what's going on then?
I think the threat of war works for both sides in that case, because Zelensky gets to consolidate his power as well by saying, okay, well, we look at what Russia's doing to us. You need me. You need what I'm creating in this country for us to be protected, to be safe. I'm here to keep you safe. This is what we have to do. Russia is our enemy. And pushing that kind of, talking points, those kind of talking points through. While Putin will do the exact same thing, saying, I'm strengthening our country. Look at me strengthen our borders. Because Putin, if there's anything he loves, is weaponizing the not the borders of actual Russia, but using the countries surrounding Russia as these proxy states that protect Russia as well, so that nobody can really come after Russia. That's been a mentality. I think this is a mentality he picked up from, Catherine the Great hundreds of years ago, and how she created the Russian Empire. And Putin has stuck to it. There's a reason he wants to maintain the Caucasus. He sees it as the gateway to Europe. You lose the Caucasus, and Russia becomes a lot more vulnerable. So as much as the North Caucasus, for instance, bring him so much grief, and over the years, I mean, we're talking about some of the hardest days of his presidency, included those 2 wars with Chechnya. And the casualties were through the roof. Nobody was happy in that situation. What he did to Chechnya was horrific. Truly, what the people of Chechnya have gone through, very few people in this world can ever understand. And we're talking people who are my age. They are traumatized beyond repair at this point. And that's Putin's doing. That's nobody else's doing but Putin's. Yet he does that because he believes in how he protects his borders. He believes in these proxy states. They're nothing to him but border walls. Instead of creating borders actually made of cement like Israel does around Gaza, he actually just uses the human beings and the land and the mountains as his border.
And so the biggest threat to that kind of power, that's not war, and that's not the threat of war, you were talking about the younger generation in Russia right now. You think that's going to be like, if anything can pull people out of that mentality? Is there a possibility that younger generation will just find their own cult sports figure to kind of fixate around? I mean, it seems like the best way to, it seems like the most obvious way to fight authority is by fighting it, right? And so by instilling your own figurehead or your own, Putin. I forgot the question I'm asking, except that, is there a possibility? Is there a danger of that happening?
Julie, I think what you were asking is that could Fedor come in?
No, not Fedor, please.
Fedor's worked for Putin. Fedor's actually done propagated Putin's policies in the past. When Putin was running for president, I cannot remember when it was, but it maybe was a decade ago now. I mean, he used Fedor. Fedor came out and gave political speeches in favor of Putin.
It's interesting because when you were saying earlier about the athlete or the kind of the faith in the athlete, the sports combat figure, I mean, Sambo and Putin are kind of so interchanged in kind of that mythology. Maybe that's
same with judo.
Yeah, that's kind of the perspective, the lens I've had of that. But then Fedor is the big dude that he can also use as, hey, I might seem small in demeanor, but I've got this power, this kind of quiet control. And here's a big dude who also does my bidding. I've derailed us. I'm so sorry.
Well, there was the time he brought in Steven Seagal to act like his bodyguard. Who brings in Steven Seagal to act as his bodyguard? But yet, this incredibly intelligent dictator somehow did. And he thought it worked in his favor somehow. But then again, Lukashenko also brought in Steven Seagal, and you just see Steven Seagal standing there. Lukashenko literally digs out a carrot from his garden, hands it to Steven Seagal, and Steven Seagal just starts eating it. That's the whole clip. That's the whole clip. And I don't understand these people. I don't understand them sometimes. Like, I feel like the line between absurdity and reality is blending so much that I'm losing my footing in this world sometimes. Like, it's incredible.
No, I mean, well, yes. I mean, we had Donald Trump as president, and and we had Tito Ortiz. We could talk about his
oh my goodness
bereft,
oh my goodness
career. Because I put a pin in that, because Julie, you have met Putin. I just realized that. Karim, do you know this?
Actually, that's true. I read that incredible story you had written back in the day. Sorry to bring it up.
No, it's fine.
It's impossible to forget, though, which tells that's great writing right there.
Yes. The one thing about him is he has so much charisma. He's not tall.
Mm-hmm.
He's not, I didn't find him particularly handsome, but charismatic. I mean, when he turned and he looked at me, it was just like, whoa.
Oh.
And it was the strangest thing, but yeah, it was bizarre. And I wasn't exactly a great representative of our country at that point. But I actually read that Yulia Berzakovich ended up working as one of his Red something, or the Red Devil team was the name of their team, but I remember she did some kind of propaganda. But it was
she did as well. She did. I think I had written something about that, but this is maybe 7-8 years ago now. I can't remember it too well.
But it seemed to be tied in with Ukraine. I thought she was born in the Ukraine, but I don't know, because she was definitely pro-Putin.
That's like when you're, being forced in those countries to do propaganda as well. So it is interesting to see. In one way, Ali, I love the way and what your thesis was about how combat sports will now, in the age of celebrity, they don't have to be bought by a dictator to distract in the old kind of sports washing. They can come in and take control and do this. So I guess for me, should we be propping like Lomoshenko, should we maybe be ahead of the game and seeing that they might come into play politically? I think I even asked you, Karim, if Nurmagomedov, Khabib would be in politics. You said you thought yes. Do you still stand behind that?
Honestly, it's interesting because I'm seeing that he's making all sorts of interesting moves right now. If I'm not mistaken, he's recently bought a sports management company and is now going to start managing football players, soccer players by that. And and a lot of the places he intends to place a lot of these athletes are going to be in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, etc. What I've noticed, what I take away from that is the sports diplomacy that Khabib is playing here, really trying to build his relationship with the Middle East and specifically the Gulf states. He seems to have some sort of relationship with them I cannot understand in terms of connection, like a spiritual connection of something of the sort. Maybe he's Muslim and thinks that that's where the root of Islam is. I don't know, but he clearly wants to maintain ties with them. That could be very useful for him later on if he does want to become a politician. Ramzan Kadyrov was seen as the Sunni Muslim envoy for Vladimir Putin. Putin would, whenever he wanted to communicate with the Gulf states like Bahrain, like the United Arab Emirates, etc., he sent Kadyrov. And Kadyrov was the person who would end up taking pictures with the bin Zayed family and, with the Al Khalifa family in Bahrain and all these different royal families. He was actually the one there because it was great for these Gulf states to be like, oh my God, look, there are actually Sunni Muslims in Russia. It's a great way to connect these people. That's diplomacy in action right there. And that's part of what made Vladimir Putin such an intelligent leader in his time. I don't know. I feel like that continues, right? It doesn't change that much.
No. And the one thing is about sports diplomacy, we've been kind of looking at like the sports washing and more of the propaganda, there is, I mean, I think about other ways like diplomacy in that when we think about the Hitler Olympics with Jesse Owens, I think that was in 1936, and how that, you know, that Hitler wanted to show this Aryan, you know, how the German was the superior thing. And we, you know, the US was able, thankfully we had Jesse Owens who said, not so fast, you know, and all these other incredible stories. I think of ping pong diplomacy, whether that was really done by the athletes, it gave a lane, an avenue to restart talking, you know. Who knows where we are with China at this point.
I feel like ping pong diplomacy, though, as an example, I feel like that's one of those more manufactured ones that the government uses as its own propaganda in the end.
Yeah.
Like there are layers to this, unfortunately. And I look at the ping pong diplomacy and I think, oh, that's just two governments congratulating themselves, patting themselves on the back for not being man babies for a change and actually sitting and talking. There's nothing to celebrate there very much in my eyes, personally. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, when it came organic situations like what happened in Germany in 1936. That was organic. Nobody could have seen that coming. No government could have interjected or changed that. Jesse Owens had to do that himself and goes down in history for that. Remarkable story. And I'm sure there are stories like that throughout history that never got told, right? The ancient Egyptians were some of the first at sports diplomacy, mind you. They would gather, you know, the pharaoh would love to gather people for these big displays of, you know, wrestling. And he would never have Egyptians competing against Egyptians. It was Egyptians against the Nubians, you know, down south in Africa, to distinguish between, you know, the Egyptians and the Nubians and the superiority of the pharaoh and his people. This has been going on for thousands of years. And I mean, the Egyptians were true propaganda kings. Like, we're talking about people who never wrote down anything bad. You will never see that in the hieroglyphics. Nobody's death was ever written down. Nothing bad ever happened to the ancient Egyptians, according to them.
According to them, the propaganda king and queens, or pharaohs, excuse me, that is amazing. And, you know, I had so many questions for you, and I know we're going on time. So Ali and Julie, please chime in. You mentioned football with Nurmagomedov, that I think that's very interesting that he's already crossing different sports. So I have to bring up FIFA and the 2022, and you brought up the Middle East. This is going to be in Qatar, the World Cup of 2022. I believe it's going to be in November because of the heat. That will help. FIFA itself,
of course I have to laugh. This whole thing is ridiculous.
I know. Because I'm thinking with going on, like, we're not banning teams anymore. I know what I thought about is when I thought about the 1974 World Cup in Chile, which was a year after Pinochet had his coup. And so there's a great 30 for 30 on this. The US actually, not that it mattered, I don't even know if we had a team that we could send there. We banned ourselves from that. But Russia, I think they played Chile. And it's another one of those things. We saw this with, is it Matumbo in Zaire at the time, which is now Democratic Republic of Congo, that there were political prisoners that they rounded up into the arena days before Russia came in and they played that game. There were people who had just been, you know, murdered and all of these things. I think, you know, so that image sticks with me from the World Cup. What is the state of the World Cup at this state? And will we see any kind of people taking any kind of stances in diplomacy?
Here's another time where I unfortunately come in with my trademark skepticism. But I mean, 2022 is a bad year for sports washing, right? It's bookended by the Olympic Games in the beginning of the year in Beijing, and the end of the year we have the FIFA World Cup in Qatar. Like, I mean, if we say we were advancing in any way progressively in terms of our understanding of sports washing, our opposition to it, unfortunately, no, we are Sisyphus stuck on the mountain right now. We are struggling very, very badly. And the biggest offenders are just those two: the World Cup, FIFA, and the Olympic Games, and they're the ones who will always be able to offer the most opportunity to these authoritarian leaders. These are the two biggest events in the world, and they happen rarely enough that they become these watchable moments. People will sit down and take the time to watch the World Cup. It's every 4 years. That matters to people. The Olympic Games, you know, you only have, some people don't even watch the winter games and they just watch the summer games every 4 years. So it's the same kind of thing, right? So unfortunately, they have that kind of power and appeal to authoritarian leaders. It wouldn't surprise me if we eventually see the World Cup take place in Saudi Arabia. I had heard rumors that Saudi Arabia was interested in co-hosting with Egypt and Morocco. That breaks my heart, because as much as I would love to see a World Cup in Egypt, believe me or not, I really would. But I know what that means, and I know who it benefits and who it hurts. And it's not going to benefit the Egyptian people. It's going to benefit the dictatorship in power. That's no good as far as I'm concerned. That's not what I'm looking for. So I'd rather the World Cup and FIFA stay the hell away from Egypt, never approach Egypt, never even come near it. But most of my countrymen won't agree with that. And Morocco has the same thing. Morocco is still governed by a monarchy that's well beloved, but a monarchy that is not guilt-free when it comes to human rights violations, including press freedom issues and etc. Saudi Arabia, do I even need to start with the disasters that is Saudi Arabia? And again, lovely people. All these countries have wonderful people. Horrific governments, just horrific governments. Qatar, we're about to watch a World Cup built on the bodies of countless of slaves that you have brought in, because we cannot refer to this as anything else. I'm so sorry. I understand. I have lived in the Gulf. I know what the kafala system is. I know what happens to domestic workers. Anything from a maid onwards, it's a horrific job, and the passports get taken away from you, all sorts of things. We've seen enough documentary. The original whistleblower, who blew the whistle on all this stuff right now, has just been put in jail in Qatar for 3 years in a trial that lasted 1 minute where he was not in attendance. This happened while FIFA representatives are in Qatar as we speak for the Arab Cup. Not a single word from FIFA as this hero goes to jail. Now, do we really expect anything to change when these are the people who represent us? And again, this is not just the fault of these organizations. I have to say this before I lose track of where we are. I forget to say this later. But a lot of this is due to the apathy of sports fans as well. If you stop thinking about just your gold medals or how many you're going to win or what match you don't get to see this weekend, maybe the world wouldn't be in such a state. Maybe these organizations wouldn't have the power they do. But people don't give a shit. They don't give a damn. They want to watch the World Cup. Now, say the World Cup doesn't happen in December. Do you think people are going to be happy? Do you think people are going to celebrate that Qatar got what it deserved? That, you know, all these people didn't die for nothing? No, all they're going to complain about is the fact that they don't get to watch the World Cup for another 4 years. That's all that will matter to them in the end. It's two people or two teams kicking a ball back and forth to each other into a net. That apparently means more to them in this world than human life, fucking life.
Yeah. Karim, I share your just also, it's like, how do we watch this happen? And what happened with the FIFA, the scandal, because it looks like Qatar didn't get, it was FIFA themselves that had the corruption problem, and then those people were persecuted or prosecuted. Is that how they tidied this up?
It's not tidy though. We're seeing what's his name, who's in power right now, Infantino, something like, I forget his name. I'm sorry, but yeah, the current president of FIFA is no better. He is happily negotiating and playing the diplomatic game with all these horrific leaders. He is going to be exactly the same as his predecessors, because his predecessors might have had added elements of financial corruption that might or might not exist anymore. Who knows? Like, I am not an expert on FIFA and that kind of corruption. There are plenty of those journalists around that doing great work in terms of uncovering the numbers themselves. But I highly doubt you've suddenly seen the eradication of FIFA's financial corruption, let alone its political corruption.
Yeah.
That's a whole other game. We're talking about the biggest sports organization in the world for the most popular sport in the world.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to be riddled with problems. Hell, its regional sections are riddled with so many problems. How many presidents of different confederations and different countries' federations so far have been removed for sexual assault, let alone other complaints? Like, we're just dealing about this, something that you should not even struggle to notice is going on. Like, if we can talk about financial corruption, might be a little harder. You might need to wait a few years to figure it out. But sexual assault, you can't even protect your athletes anymore. You're like, okay, it's fine. You don't care about the fans. You don't care about human life. You don't care about all that. Well, your athletes, you need them for money, don't you? Like, just as a business concept, like, well, what's going on here? How incompetent can you be? And how long can this incompetence go on before any consequences take place?
100%, Karim. And you know what, you're like, as we're talking, the idea, and I think at this time in history, we may be, these promotions or, FIFA and the IOC are ripe because to be taken in by a dictator, because, before it was, the fights that they would bring Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, and that would be publicity. Don't look at the stuff we've done in the background here, or like our, human rights violations and how we're stealing from the government. Now it seems like the genesis is coming from the IOC, which I think we know that countries who host the Olympics don't make money. It's actually a loss. It used to be kind of a symbol of achievement. You're very proud, but I think a lot of cities have been, because it's a city in the US that will campaign for it, or other countries. They're like, no, like if they come, I know that there was a campaign for Washington, DC, and you have to show the Olympic Committee how much infrastructure you'll make, how much you're willing to give. And, we just don't, we're just wanting to be a state here in DC. But it's amazing. But then Qatar comes along and they know that because I've heard about this servitude where people are sometimes from other countries are brought in, taking their passport, and they're not fed, they're working in really harsh conditions and dying to make these arenas or these places, because they've promised FIFA that, well, they'll give them that. So for me, I almost think that it's the IOC is now realizing we need these kind of dictators, strongmen, because they'll give us what we want.
That's an excellent point. As a matter of fact, those are the ideal countries. If you're dealing with democratic countries, that comes with bureaucracy, that comes with red tape, that comes with all sorts of issues that why would a sports league ever want to deal with when they know they can just sign a contract with a dictatorship, which will wipe out a specific section entirely, completely move people around, throw them away, kill them, whatever it comes down to, and we'll use the cheapest labor possible, if we can even call it labor. As I had said, it is at this point slavery. And you do that, of course it's going to be easier. Of course it's cheaper for the IOC. Of course it's cheaper for FIFA. They don't have the slightest concern at that point. It all gets done and they can claim willful ignorance. It's that simple.
Exactly. So this needs to be known more. I think that we need to get people to understand that, yes, did I watch the Olympics? Yes. I now will not feel very, I'll feel guilty about it and what's gone into it. And same, I love the World Cup. I love, even the US doesn't make it all the time. And I actually think, aren't they making more opportunities or giving more bursts for more countries to be able to participate? Which
that's another money grab. That's another money grab in itself. But okay.
Exactly.
They were trying to make the World Cup biannual or every 2 years instead of every 4 years. Again, what is going on here? Like the amount of just the push for profiting at the expense of everything else.
Yeah. So who holds the IOC or FIFA accountable? I know we've had some financial corruption. I don't know who came in, that they did get, the right kind of sanctioning, or the right people were hope not the right people, but people were prosecuted.
Mhm.
How do you combat that?
That's actually an interesting question. I haven't thought about what oversight actually does the International Olympic Committee face. That's definitely worth some research to look into. I actually don't have the answer to that question at the moment. But I assume is that if corruption is found in any one specific country, that they can come after the IOC, depending on how powerful that country is. But it's a very difficult position. You're acting as a company without necessarily a country to back it up. It's goes to show you just how they're operating. They're operating as their own state, even. Like,
Yes,
it's frightening.
it is. Yeah, Julie.
It's terrifying. And just watching all of this now, I guess because sports are actually insanely important to people, and I don't think we can take that away. We've seen it just does not, that connection doesn't stop. How does one become a responsible sports fan? What do we do to find some element of hope when we're seeing all this corruption? I mean, surely there's got to be a way somehow. And do you have tips? Do you have any advice for people who actually want to do good and have sports on the table?
I know people think I'm out for canceling everything, which is funny considering not a single one of my articles ever mentions boycotts or canceling anything. But I understand that that's the sense people get from it. But here's what I'm here to tell you is that also rarely works at this point. And because you're never going to get it implemented at a wide enough scale for it to cause any harm to anyone else. Not enough people are going to boycott. You tell them right now, get a hashtag going, you get support behind it. You know, you could have one picture of one dead cutter, you know, the way people love their trauma porn, and they'll spread that around across the internet, get a hashtag going. You still won't have enough people boycotting the Olympics or the World Cup. So what you do at this point, applying pressure is a key one. Awareness is the first step, really. Just having self-awareness and awareness of what's going on around you is already, you are doing yourself a favor rather than just living in complete ignorance. So that's just me. I don't like living in ignorance. I don't like not knowing what's around me. That's the very first step. From there, it comes down to your own personal preferences. I specifically, after the last decade of covering the UFC, I rarely watch MMA events. I just say this now. It's honest to truth. No one sees me online during an event, and that's because I do that by design. If something happens that I really want to watch, whenever I feel like it's a time for me to watch, I'll go back and I'll sit down personally and watch it. But it draws up so much dread and anxiety in me that I can't participate in much of the fun things that come around most sports anymore. I can occasionally sit and watch a World Cup game, etc. But sports have reached a point with all the reporting I've done that they bring me more anxiety than they do joy. That's me as an individual. I'm not asking for that to happen to anybody else. I understand the joy it brings plenty of people. And I have plenty of other things in my life that bring me joy. Awareness is key. You want to take steps from then on, applying pressure. If enough people actually attempt to apply pressure, whether it be, you know, calling your MP, whether it be, even though I don't believe that most politicians really care and will only act at their own personal benefit rather than at your bequest, but approaching and joining forces with, you know, Amnesty International, Human Rights Foundation, Human Rights Watch, there are plenty of incredible outlets and organizations out there that do incredible work. There are ways for us to apply pressure. Social media, everybody has a social media account. Everybody's prepared to be outraged about the stupidest thing that's happening on the internet every few hours. Well, why not direct that rage, that upset, that cooped up feeling you have from this pandemic and actually direct it somewhere useful for a change? You know, like there are small things that we can do at this moment, but unfortunately, we are dealing with situations that have gone way above any of our pay grades. Truly, when politicians are sitting down behind closed doors, at this point it is behind closed doors, this stuff isn't happening in public press conferences, and making these deals. And despite the fact that me as a journalist, I'm writing these outlets for The Guardian, for Foreign Policy, for mainstream outlets, we're not just talking about MMA websites anymore, and it's still not making the difference it's supposed to. Well, we are in a cycle that I'm struggling to find a way out of, personally.
Mm-hmm.
We are, and I wish I could come up with more positive approaches here. And I'm sure I'd love to hear from any of you, honestly, anything you think that we could do that would actually work at this point. Because apart from this applying pressure, apart from awareness, I really can't think of much else at this point.
Well, my thoughts on this is actually something that you said, Karim. It's, what do we need in sports? We need the athletes. Because I remember, I believe it was this summer that in the world of like kind of European soccer, they tried to make a new league. This is all just for financial gain.
Of course, the
But
Super League, yeah.
I woke up the Super League. We woke up Monday, and these like Barcelona and I don't know, Madrid had decided they were leaving the Champions League, or I'm not, I don't know all my leagues, but to join the Super League. But what happened was public pressure, and there's a lot of money in soccer. It didn't work because I think a lot of people said they want their Champions League. They don't want to see a different league. And there's a lot of probably TV rights and all these other things. However, it was a possibility. Like that could happen for me. Like I would love something like that. Now in soccer, it could happen because if they could get their salaries in another place, that promises that we will not deal with corrupt governments. We will be green. We will do all of these things. We will be pro safety, all of these things if they get enough athletes who will take that chance. I mean, the Super League? What was it called again? Big Super League?
Super League, yeah. The Super League.
Yes, it didn't work. I think it was done by the week. Everyone had decided to leave it. That's a possibility. Now, with the one thing with IOC, those athletes don't make money.
Mm-hmm.
So that to have them there choose to go to another league, the Olympics also have that cachet. I mean, it's, we've been doing them for so long, and it goes back in history.
Prestige. It's the prestige factor.
But it's just for me that think that the athletes could come together. I mean, that's like a union. But those are also like, we're not in a pro-union time. I think Julie knows this with MMA. But I would hope though, because I do think, like Karim, when you said that they're almost like their own state, it is a little frightening to think about how they could, they have so much power of what more they could do in terms of controlling governments and coming in and allowing governments to do what they need to do. So that's my thought.
It's empowering governments. I can truly see either FIFA or the Olympic Games in the very near future empowering Saudi Arabia far further than we've seen so far. Saudi Arabia's biggest push right now is pushing its tourism. It's trying to push for this 2030 vision 2030 idea of moving past dependence on oil and their oil money and directing it to everything else. So one of the things that they're really focused on is tourism. They've brought in art shows and art biennales. They've gotten all sorts of incredible
tournaments.
Very, very big. Oh, exactly. You've had boxing, you've had all sorts of sports happening there, but they haven't had their big coming out party yet. And now that really requires a major organization to participate. And I mean, sure, they had the biggest boxing fight of a couple of years ago. I can't remember the stuff like that. They had big events, but those are like 1-day shows, 2-day shows. They need something that's going to last a little longer and something that brings in enough visitors that are able to then leave the country and say, you'll never believe what I did in Saudi Arabia. You'll never believe how incredible this country was. I remember being in Egypt shortly after the World Cup in Russia in 2018. All my friends who came back, the first thing that they were telling me is Russia's incredible. The US just teaches you that Russia's crap, but Russia was amazing. I had such a great time in Russia. That's what Putin wants exactly. And mind you, I spent a lot of time in Russia and I love Russia and I agreed with everything they said. And the United States does push extreme propaganda against Russia that is absolutely unacceptable. But still, the point stands that this is exactly what Putin wanted. He wants you to believe and to experience this version of Russia. And of course, the version of Russia they experienced was a very sanitary version. The streets were extra clean. People had been moved out of the way. They ensured that there were no hooligans participating. Hooligans were actually literally trapped at home. Like they got these basic house arrests, and told if you show up, you're going to jail. It's that simple. So they really went out and they culled countless animals, dogs and cats, all sorts of horrific things that were done for this sanitary version of Russia to show up. And I say this as someone who, when I didn't visit that sanitary, but I visited the real Russia, and I loved it. So there's all these different ways to experience the world and to experience these things we like, but I hate that the narratives that are being pushed from every single direction somehow seem to relate back to some sort of government propaganda at this point, and it really bothers me.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to continue to see. Someday soon, we're going to see this happen in Saudi Arabia. I have no doubt at this point. They offer way too much money. And I think this leads back to something you were just saying, Nancy, which is, okay, well, you say you start this other league where athletes can go, it's going to be green, they're not going to deal with corrupt countries, etc. Well, unfortunately, you don't deal with them. Where's the money coming from? Because it's those countries that have the money. And at the end of the day, that's what athletes are going to care about. That's what most people are going to care about. At the end of the day, it's the bottom line. It's very hard to fight that one. The pursuit of profit, this ultra-capitalistic narrative we all have is just, or all these countries have, is just brutal. It's brutal. It's brutal. There's how do you fight it? How do you convince an athlete, no matter how wonderful they are, not to take life-changing money?
Yeah.
There's a reason why so many MMA fighters went and visited Ramzan Kadyrov, not out of a sheer love for Kadyrov, but out of the fact that he was offering them like $500,000 each.
Yes.
That's in the MMA, that's life-changing money. That might not that might be chump change for Mo Salah or football players, but that's not chump change for an MMA fighter.
That's a house, that's your children's college.
Absolutely.
I mean, I understand. And so I know that that's a hard decision to make when that is life-changing money. No, and Ali, because I think we're running out of time. But I could go on.
Sorry, that's exactly. I'm sorry, I can go on forever.
Good.
But Ali, do you have any other questions?
No, I just kind of wanted to add that to the conversation that like after writing this paper, like I was left with like an uncomfortable feeling like, okay, I just wrote this, so what? Like no one knows about it. Like I talked to like my mom or my dad, or like I have a friend that owns like a boxing gym, and like he doesn't know anything about like the boxing world, about like the connection it has with politics. Like no one knows about it. And like I know if I wouldn't have taken this class, I probably would have never found out about it. So you're left with this feeling that's like, so what? Like they're all doing and yeah, you get this feeling with like a lot of other things, but with this one, I would have never expected it. Like
it really does heighten one's existential dread, doesn't it? Like it's really something. There's a reason why I get so anxious now when I watch sports in general, because I find it so hard. It really requires us, like, I don't know what it takes for me to be in what sort of mood or how many drinks I need to have had beforehand to be in any way in a stable enough position to sit and watch a game and just enjoy it for what it is at this point. Whether it be football or I'm always thinking of, well, where's it happening? Where's it happening? I'm always thinking of something that just drives me insane. I just can't do it anymore. I can barely be on Twitter in general. This is now after, I don't know, when did I start writing about sports and politics? 2015, I think. So this is 6 years now of 6 full years of writing about this stuff. And it weighs on you. It weighs on you in the end. And you get to this position. I wish I could appear on shows, appear on stages like this and say more positive things or more hopeful things, but I am running out of hope for myself to even pass on. That's the problem.
Karim, you said earlier in this discussion at the top of kind of our conversation, the way literature can provide also a kind of a way out. You said, some of the greats used magical realism. You touched on that a couple of times as a way of kind of processing horror. Is that something, I mean, honestly, I haven't thought about magical realism in quite a while till you brought it up. I'm just wondering, do you think there's going to be a trend when it comes to literature? Or do you think there's something that's going to come up that's going to help people who are becoming more aware find an outlet?
I certainly hope so. I can speak for myself and say magical realism has been my outlet for processing all these different things in a way that I can't in my journalism. So my journalism, you see a very specific side of me. You want deeper layers, it's in my short stories, believe it or not. Much, much deeper layers than what go into my journalism. And it has been remarkably therapeutic. I cannot, but then again, I've always been attracted to magical realism. I come from a country that believes in, jinn. These are concepts that are considered very normal, to have ghosts around, to have the concept of evil magic being, or cursing people. These are all things that people believe in Egypt. So I grew up with this not necessarily being out of the realm of possibility. So adding magical realism just made sense in my life in a way that it might seem too absurd for other readers. But it did become a great way for me to process things. I have got a couple of those stories on my own website. One called Long Live the Storm, which I used to look over the Egyptian revolution in just about 500, 600 words. And I don't know, that story to me, I can go back to, and it provides me some sort of peace. At least I've been able to encapsulate my opinion, my understanding, and how I feel. A little, maybe even a little piece of myself is in there in a way that it doesn't necessarily reflect in my journalism. And that's become my outlet, truly. I know I am not destined for journalism for too much longer, or for, this is not my future the way I envision my future. I definitely see myself going the direction of, I mean, I'm currently right now finishing a short story collection. I'm starting a novel. I'm working on 2 nonfiction books. This is the stuff I love. That's what I want to do. And it's the only thing that's keeping me sane right now. Honestly, I'm speaking from the heart here, truly.
But what you said earlier, you said, sometimes it's the literature and the stuff like that where you actually get the truth, not the things that, because so much propaganda is pushed, right? Even in journalism.
Oh, yes.
There's so many stories that are pushed out because they're forced to be pushed out, or that's how somebody feeds their family, and not because they're trying to get the information out there. I don't know. I was thinking about Marquez, and I was thinking about, the magical realism, I guess. The
Gabriel
Russians
Garcia,
also,
he's brilliant. He's brilliant.
insanely good. But I was thinking about the Russians too. There was so much interesting stuff that came out in some of the darker periods of Russia in literature. But again, I know I said this before, and I'm not trying to derail the conversation and talk about like fiction too much, but
It factors in.
Anything that you could link us to or tell us to read when it comes to stuff that's maybe not in the stuff of, not Marquez. Gosh, now I can't remember.
Okay. Let's see. Give me a second. I have a book right in the center here that I think is a starting point for plenty of people. A book called Children of the Alley by Naguib Mahfouz. Essential reading, essential example of magical realism right here. Let's see. Books that matter.
I'll grab my book that I recommend.
Please do. 1 second. Here, I'm pulling out several more that I think are extremely essential reading from different genres here.
And Ali, feel free to jump in on here if there's writers and stuff, because I know that certainly Venezuela's gone through its fair share of horrors. Oh, definitely. Oh,
fine.
Hey.
Jorge.
Let's do this shit. I love that we're sharing books here.
Yeah. Yes, I know. I know. What else do you have?
Jorge is I love him. I love it. Yes. Excellent choice.
Think about what Argentina has gone through, this country that continues, to deal with it. And you're right, the art is a way of also not processing it, but also having people connect to it. I love how you brought that up, because I think about great works of fiction that we know, for some reason, Animal Farm is coming to me, or, 1984, which were about things happening, but to really connect it to people and to understand these themes, you almost have to get away.
I was thinking about Guernica, right? I was thinking even a painting can.
Picasso's Guernica is essential. Is very great example of that. Absolutely, art is another great way of expressing in the world what you could not in writing, even for a lot of people.
Yes, no, and I find this interesting to bring this thread through, because with COVID, I think I've told Ali and Julie, Professor Kedzie there, I've used fiction to get through because I missed seeing friends and all that. So I read so much, and I watched a lot of Netflix, because when you enter that narrative, it is, and they've done studies, they show that it is, you're connecting to a world. You have oxytocin is in your brain, which is kind of like so that you feel you're connected to these characters, especially if it's really well written. So I understand, and it's kind of interesting though that we kind of went back to this idea that maybe trying to cover this, and you're right, Karim, there are articles in the Guardian, and like you write these in Bloody Elbow. Why is it not doing the effect of what we want is awareness, and then people saying this is irreprehensible, this is not appropriate? Perhaps it's connecting in narrative or in storytelling or in magical realism.
There's so many things that have happened when it comes to journalism. There's of course the erasure of trust in general, just the complete eradication of trust in journalism. That's that's something, unfortunately, as much as we can complain is not our fault, it's something we're still going to have to win back. It's down to us to win back now. Uh, the other is an inability to really reach the reader anymore. And I struggle with that in my work because a lot of my work is dense and I hate writing dense articles, but I try my best to summarize difficult topics for a general audience. But there's more to that if you want to relate to somebody. It's not just words on a paper telling them, here's a concept you didn't know, now you know, goodbye. There's much more to that. Like, how do you really appeal to? That's why I mentioned long forms right off the bat, because there are ways to get through to people, but you have to give them a story that they understand. And there are ways to do it without fetishizing trauma, like, which was something MMA loves to do. My goodness, MMA loves to do this. But yeah, fiction is what taught me that. Fiction is that taught me if I want to relate to something. I have been in love with the work of Haruki Murakami. And oh my goodness, I can't believe it has taken me this long to discover his work. What a remarkable author. And for some reason, everything is speaking to me that he writes. Like, I just sit with these books for hours and I consume them in a way, like I could spend hours reading the New York Times, but I'm not picking up and holding on to the information. It's not sitting in a little box next to my heart the same way some of what he writes is. And that's kind of the problem. Like Chechnya, what really made it stick with me early on, how intense what happened to Chechnya was over the years, was this book, A Constellation of Vital Phenomena.
Yes.
It's a fiction story. It's a remarkable book for anybody who wants to read a book about Chechnya that's written in English. That's a great example of what fiction can do. You want to learn about countries in a way from its actual people and not just from, dense academic sources or my journalism or journalism or journalism of the sort. Read books. You want to learn about Libya and Libya's like human sexualities and the different things you can do. There's incredible literature about that as well. More magical realism here in Gardens of the Night by Ahmed Fakki, who's an incredible writer who barely anybody knows. One of my mentors in literature wrote one of the defining books in contemporary Egypt, The Book of the Sultan's Seal by Yusuf Rakha. What an incredible author who's seen as the descendant to Naguib Mahfouz in Egypt right now, telling a story of Egypt's history through traffic jams and through incredible correlations in history. It's just fascinating to read some of these things and to understand the world through that lens. People shun fiction. People shun literary fiction as pompous, as pretentious, as unrelatable. I think you just haven't read the right things. I think it's time for people to lay off the Charles Dickens and start approaching Naguib Mahfouz. Charles Dickens is overrated. Charles Dickens is extraordinarily overrated, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
I love it.
Other authors, because I'm now realizing this is why I have a special place about certain countries. I'm thinking Isabel Allende, who she's known for House of Spirits and some other books, Chile. And I think she's actually a descendant, like a daughter or someone of a former, of the former dictator, but she understands this country and what it's gone through. And then Orhan Pamuk with Turkey.
Absolutely.
But I agree with you. And I think, it is interesting because I do think combat sports, as going back into journalism, this was the cover of my Economist. And I thought that it's like, what would America fight for? And they're just talking about what as a country the US is carrying globally anymore. And I just thought this image of the boxing gloves. And Karim, there is something about combat sports, if like we're circling back to talking about these former champions in combat sports who are now in politics, but there is something very interesting. Maybe it's also because you're not part of a team, you are a person who's recognized. But I do think that we have to remember, like, this is a metaphor, to be a visual. Julie, you're so great about this, the visual narrative that you have we do an exercise about. It is interesting, though, that I do think we have to remember this is a symbol, but how we can communicate these things.
And you know what's so different too? You talk about symbols. That symbol would have come across very differently if it was just a pair of boxing gloves like Everlast or something like that,
Yeah.
versus boxing gloves, emblazoned with the American flag.
Wow.
Two very different messages being pushed.
Yes.
It's something as simple as that.
Yeah. But there's a reason they chose the boxing gloves, because it brings in all of this and what we've been talking about. I do want to hope, and maybe by talking about Tito Ortiz at the end, showing that the systems some work out. He was someone, I believe he ran for the Huntington City Council, or
yes, he did,
and he won. I believe he had to leave. He resigned for many reasons, I think, but one of the particular that I heard was that he was taking money, with the COVID payouts while still getting a salary as a city council. So I was just like, you know what? That sometimes they will just implode when there's nothing behind it. So
that's really the hope. That really is the hope. You give me hope by just reminding me of the human potato that is Tito Ortiz.
Well, I would like to think that Donald Trump is going to go in the same way as the human potato in terms of he's out. We did, there was something, and I'm hoping for even more, comeuppance. But I will. I as you say, I'm a little skeptical these days.
And it's fine to be skeptical. I find it to be it's my approach at the end of the day. Some people prefer a more sort of positive approach and optimism. I tend to think my skepticism is what prepares me a little more. It's just my approach. I even argue with my wife about this all the time in terms of our approaches to certain things. But it's true, even with the skepticism, that doesn't mean the fight is not worth fighting. It doesn't mean that at all. There's a reason we're all still here talking about this and doing what we do. And I respect every single one of you for what you do, truly, because that's what matters, right? It's never supposed to be easy. Like I said earlier, it's Sisyphus on the mountain, but Sisyphus didn't stop, did he? Just kept rolling that boulder up there. But we are going through another shift in history, just as we have market cycles, we have historical cycles of ups and downs, and we are in one of those downs at this point with a lot to fight for and a lot that's coming up. That doesn't change that it's worth fighting for. It doesn't change that things could eventually turn in our favor. This is what generations before us have had to fight as well for all sorts of different things. It's no different, I think, at this point. And we all do it in our very different ways, whatever way that approach is, whether it's preserving information, whether it's putting the information out there, whether it's simply, applying pressure to an organization. Your favorite art gallery is promoting somebody who sexually assaulted somebody. Just any little steps you take is a positive step in that direction. Nihilism is probably our biggest enemy in a fight like this, truly. Yeah. And that's what I unfortunately see with a lot of people. I am, at the end of the day, the son of the Egyptian revolution that happened. And you want to talk about a lost generation of people. It's the lost generation of the Arab Spring that fought for something, plenty of whom died, and the ones who did survive not only survive with survivor's guilt, but with a sense of dread and understand we did so much and we got nothing. Not only did we get nothing out of it, we're in a worse spot than we ever were beforehand. That's a horrific place to be in. And those are the ones that I see the light has gone out of their eyes, and nihilism is all that exists. We fall into that trap when we haven't faced yet what they have faced. You do everything in your power to not arrive at that stage. And that's kind of where we are right now, balancing between sort of skepticism and trying not to become nihilists.
I love also that and those can also be talked about in terms of literature. So I love how you expand this out. And my last thing I want to say, Karim, I want you to come back because we didn't even get into a fight that I am very, very strong, passionate about: student athletes and how they are used by universities.
I have plenty to say there too.
And it's interesting we brought up literature because there's a movie, I don't know much about it, and I don't think the movie's that great, that came out December 10th called, I think, National Champions. It's all fictional, and it's the scenario of a student athlete, like the star of the football team, decides that he's not going, because of the way they've been treated or something, they're not getting paid, or all these things, he is going to, I guess, unionize. And it shows kind of the thing. I think it's got like J.K. Simmons in it and stuff like that. But it's fictional, but that's a way to kind of connect people, because they're watching something, so that it's brought in a different way. So I hope that people, because I think what you're saying, this nihilism, is that this is happening in front of us, where we have governments doing this. We have everyone, we watched on TV the World Cup, and we don't even know to feel bad. And we are so blind, but it's happening right in front of us. So that is the challenge. So we're going to come and do that conversation.
I'm ready. Whenever you are, I'm ready.
All right. No, thank you. We would love it. And I would love also, there are other students who have incorporated your work, and it's that I would love the opportunity for you to talk with them too, because it's inspiring.
You know what? If they're anywhere near as intelligent as Alejandra is, and great with her questions, then I'd be more than delighted to.
Oh, thank you so much.
Honestly, thank you. This is one of the few things that gives me hope, is seeing students like you. Truly, keep doing what you're doing. And I'm sorry that we're doing it in such a difficult time, but it is the way it is right now. But thank you so much. Honestly, your questions were great, and I'm so happy you wrote that article on Manny Pacquiao. It's important, at least, even if only a few more people know, which, trust me, I think you underestimate how many people will end up reading it, but in general, it always matters.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to my professors.
Thank you, Ali. Karim, where can people find you? The easiest way, or multiple ways?
And can we pre-order your books?
Not yet, but eventually we'll get there, and I cannot wait till those days come along. I am unfortunately a bit OCD and a bit of a perfectionist, so a lot of these things do take a little longer than I've hoped for, but hopefully we'll get there very soon. Now, in terms of where people can find me, I think they find me a little too easily on Twitter already. Like, I get far too many people than I want on there. Stop coming to my Twitter, as a matter of fact. Please stop. Now. I'm not even saying what my Twitter is. I'm done.
But if they wanted to go to karimzadin.com, they can read not only some of your journalism, but some of your short stories?
It's true. They can read. I only have a few up there right now. I plan on updating it very soon, along with the website in general. And there will be a lot more to read there very soon. But there's 3 examples of my short fiction there right now. And there are 3 other published examples. If you just type in Karim Zadin fiction, you'll find it somewhere. There's multiple other outlets that have published some of my other fiction as well. So I do hope that's the kind of stuff that I really want people to read. The journalism, people seem to find it, and people seem to get mad about it no matter what. So what I really want them to find now is the fiction. Maybe they'll see a different side of me.
No, and I think, Julie, we're going to start a fan club for the Karim Zadin short stories, we'll do a book club where we talk about things.
Yeah. Amazing.
Sounds wonderful. Yeah, that sounds great.
As much as we got into some dark territory, thank you for showing us the power of the word and how you can use it. And thank you. I love your passion, Karim.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I do so few shows. I do so few appearances, just because even that causes anxiety that I find is unnecessary and brings out, that skepticism in me. But sometimes there are people I respect too much not to say yes to immediately. So thank you both for everything you do. And thank you, Ali, honestly, again, for your article. I'd love to read it. I have not had the chance to read it. So if possible, if I'm allowed to, I'd love to please read it.
Yeah, I'll send it. Well, Professor has it, so she can send it to you.
Please do.
I will, but I'll include your email address. So yes, I will send it to you.
Please do.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good weekend. I'm going to try and watch not a sport that makes me feel guilty. That's And please read something, a short story. Just, I mean,
Yes.
oh,
Yes.
and the thing is about like a short story like this, or Marquez, is that sometimes what I find great about it is that you have to fill in the connection because it's not spoon fed. But wow, does that pierce your soul when you
and I love that. I love that. There's something so profound about literature that cannot be read. There's a reason why most of the movies and films made of books are not worth their salt, are not worth the money spent on them at all. Nothing can truly replace your imagination, your ability to think. Don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise.
Yeah. Can I leave on an Alice Munro quote then?
Yes, please. She's a phenomenal short story writer.
I know. A short story is like walking into a stranger's house, and you go in and you look at the furniture and the decor, and the people, but then so when you walk out, the world looks different than it did before. I was like,
that's beautiful.
Yes. So
well
I paraphrased that, guys. So I will put the real quote up on the link here. But thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.